excited to continue all of our NFL offseason talk with Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer, the MMQB senior NFL writer and lead content strategist. Albert, you're one of those people that I always wonder, like, when do you eat? When do you sleep? When do you just chill out? Because every time I look up, you've got a new article or you're doing another spot. How are you? Thank you for taking some time with us.
I'm good, Stormy. I got about a week left, and as Michael knows, it's about time for all of us to wind down for a few weeks before things really get fired up. So I'm getting close to where I'll disappear where you can't find me for a little while.
There you go. Well
Yeah,
deserved.
that,
You get
that's
some of
tr-
that break.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. So before you go on that break, there's a lot of speculation about Hopkins in New England,
Mhm.
and you're wired within that organization. Give me the percentages of what you think Hopkins actually signing a huge contract with the Patriots are.
I mean, I don't know how huge the contract's going to be, Michael. I think a big part of the last 3 months really has been Hopkins reckoning with his own value. If you go back to before the draft, both Buffalo and Kansas City, I think we're at a place with Arizona where they would have done the draft pick compensation. The question was the contract, and they had kind of gone down the line with him on the contract too. And the Odell Beckham deal getting done during draft week really blew things up on both teams. And I think that a big piece of this is going to be when Hopkins gets to the point where he's willing to take a little less than he had originally imagined he'd get, and being willing to take a little bit less than Beckham got. I think New England's got a good shot at him, though. From what I understand, he's been intrigued with the idea of playing for Belichick. The visit went well last week. He had one-on-one time with Bill. What I keep hearing from that organization is that he's going to have to do this deal on Bill's terms, and so that's going to mean monetarily. It might mean working up out something where there's a real practice plan that he's going to have to stick to because, as you know, the guy doesn't practice as much and has to be managed physically, similar to the way Julio had to be managed, towards the end of his time in Atlanta. But I think they were able to work some of that stuff out last week, and I think now it sort of comes down to how long Hopkins wants to wait. I certainly think there's an idea out there that if he waits closer to training camp, maybe a few different things might open up as teams get back in their buildings and review, how the spring went and where they are at the receiver position.
Well, and two, because of like the podcast he did where he laid out a number of the different requirements, so to speak, that he has in looking for the next team that he goes up to. There are other teams that have been like the Buffalo Bills, for example, that have
Mhm.
been brought up a number of times. Where do you think that the money and the opportunity ultimately could fit the best, whether it's New England or
Yeah.
otherwise?
Well, I think Buffalo, the problem with Buffalo right now, I know one of their concerns in the beginning was there's only one ball and we have to get it to Stephon Diggs quite a bit. And I would say if that was a concern in April after what happened last week, it would be even more of a concern now. They got a lot of mouths to feed, and it's not just Stephon Diggs. It's how does Dalton Kincaid fit into their offense? What role does Dawson Knox play around that? They got Gabe Davis going into a contract year. So I think beyond just the money, there's that question of how do we bring in a guy who's a volume guy in Hopkins and keep Diggs happy. I think with Kansas City, it's going to be a little bit more based on where their second round pick is, Rashi Rice, and how they look at that coming out of the spring. I know that a big piece of it for them going into draft week, as they were pursuing Hopkins, was well, we need to come out of this with at least one more body at receiver. And when the Hopkins thing fell through, they gave the money that they were going to give to Hopkins to Donovan Smith, the left tackle. You could argue that was a bigger need for them at the time, and they filled the receiver need in the second round there with Rasheed Rice. So now the question becomes, how do they feel about Rice after having him in the building for 6 weeks through the spring? And can they get a Chris Jones extension done? If they get a Chris Jones extension done, maybe some money's freed up. And then they can look at it and say, are we comfortable with where Rice is, or do we want to add Hopkins? So I think that that's sort of the scenario you could see where maybe, one of those teams has something open up for Hopkins. But as of right now, it's the Titans and the Patriots. And I think the Patriots, again, like the idea of it. I think Hopkins likes, the idea of playing for Belichick. And Hopkins also has a very close relationship with Mike Vrabel, which is a big piece of why Tennessee's interested in him.
Yeah. How about Dalvin Cook? I mean, to me it seems like his agent is telling people he's got a $9 million market. Where do you think he ends up, and do you think he gets 9 million?
You know what's interesting, Michael, is like I think it's sort of like what goes to where the running backs have been in general, and sort of where Josh Jacobs wants to be, and where Saquon Barkley wants to be, and I think these guys look around and they see guys at other skill positions, and they feel shortchanged, and rightfully so. You know what I mean? Like those guys are good players; they're as good as players at receiver who are getting a lot more than they are. Bottom line is the value is what the value is, and if you look at the guys even the very top of the market, those guys were getting 6 million a year. The David Montgomerys, the Miles Sanders, those guys at the top of the free agent market were getting 6 million a year. So, I think that's part of the reason why, he's gone from Minnesota now. Like the Vikings were willing to bring him back, but at not at the rate that he was on the books for on his old contract. And I think we're at a point in the calendar where the cash and cap budgets have been spent. The one team I keep an eye on is Miami, because Miami nearly had a deal done with him back in March. Now there were some things legally that I think scared the Dolphins off a little bit at that point. But would they circle back? Maybe they were looking to add an explosive element to their offense. This ties back again to another rookie where they draft Devon A-Chain out of Texas A&M, who's very explosive. They're on day 2 of the draft. How do they feel about him after having him in the building for 6 weeks? Do they feel like they have to double back to add an explosive element to their run game and a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield? That's my question. But I'd be surprised if he got 9 million. I could see him making what Miles Sanders or David Montgomery made. It's just hard to see him making a whole lot more based on where the market's been.
Here with Sports Illustrated NFL senior writer Albert Breer, joining us on the Lombardi line here with VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Let's stick with the running back position. Saquon Barkley and the Giants reportedly both, not panicking in terms of getting a deal done between the two parties, but the deadline for that franchise tag to get signed is July 17th. We're less than a month now away. What's your understanding of how those talks have gone from both sides?
Well, if you look at the history of these things, Stormy, it's usually right before the deadline that these deals get done. A lot of times it takes the deadline to get a deal done. And I think the Giants have put something that's more than fair in front of Saquon Barkley that would represent a deal that'd be at the top of the market. Something with inflation, like what Joe Mixon got from Cincinnati or Nick Chubb got from Cleveland. And ultimately, I think it's easy to stand here in the middle of June and say, well, that's not, that's not up to what I'm worth. I mean more to the team than that. I think it's a lot harder to say no to it when it's the middle of July and you're going to put another year of wear and tear on your body. And after that, be through 6 years and expect that there be a robust market out there for you. So it's unfortunate, because Saquon Barkley's done a lot of things right. He's survived a lot of injuries. He's, by all accounts, a really good guy. And he was such a focal point of what they were offensively last year, really helped them get more out of Daniel Jones. I just think at some point, logic has to play in here where the Giants are putting something based on the market that's pretty fair to Saquon. And I think Saquon's got to, take some good reason into this and say, I've got 5 years of mileage on my legs. I've got a lot of injury history in my background now. I need to just take the cash that's there because I don't know what's going to be there for me in 2024 after I put another year of mileage on my body.
Albert, real quickly here, we only have about a minute left. What team do you think is going to be the surprise team that no one's really talking about that could really advance next year, that has all the ingredients from talking to people around the league?
It's like, Michael, the interesting thing is like it's so wide open in the NFC. The one team I'm just sort of, kind of keeping an eye on is Seattle. I think internally they feel like they've got a lot of the elements that they had, 10 years ago when the Shermans and the Thomases and the Chancellors and the Wagners and all those guys were coming up together. And the 2 young tackles they drafted last year and the running back and the 2 young corners they have out of last year's draft. And they feel really good about where they are coming out of this year's draft, with guys like Witherspoon coming into the fold and Jackson Smith and Jigba out of Ohio State. Like I look at it like there's a lot of good young talent that's sort of all coming together at once there. Geno's the variable. Can Geno do it again? If he can, I think that they'd be a very real contender in the NFC.
Albert, thanks for doing this. Enjoy your offseason.
Great job, Albert.
Downtime.
Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate
Thanks,
you.
guys. Have a good one.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.